Donald Trump's sudden and inexplicable hostility toward India marks a sharp reversal of policies upheld by 5 successive U.S. administrations, including his own first term. If this shift endures, it could go down as the most significant strategic error of Trump's presidency so far. Initially, it seemed unthinkable. India, the nation Washington had long relied upon as a counterbalance to China, has taken a step that has stunned observers worldwide. New Delhi has extended an olive branch to Beijing. Following a high-level meeting with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, India appears to be signaling a new trajectory, one that few believe possible: the prospect of moving closer to China than to the United States. This is far more than a fleeting diplomatic story. It could mark a fundamental turning point in global geopolitics. Washington has spent decades integrating India into its strategic calculus, viewing it as a democratic heavyweight capable of containing Beijing's rise. For years, the U.S. operated on the assumption that India would remain steadfastly in its corner, regardless of shifting global tides. That assumption is now beginning to unravel, largely due to Trump's own actions. Trump's abrupt change in stance has reversed years of bipartisan policy, including those implemented during his first term. Rather than nurturing a relationship once considered a cornerstone of America's Indo-Pacific strategy, Trump has introduced tariffs, issued demands, and adopted a confrontational tone, pushing India to reconsider its alignments. If this reversal holds, it could become Trump's most consequential foreign policy blunder. Trump's strategy was straightforward: use tariffs and pressure to isolate China, expecting allies to rally behind the U.S. But the global response didn't align with that vision. While Trump touted wins, Beijing quietly assembled something more enduring: a sprawling economic network across the global south. Chinese exports to developing nations now surpass $1 trillion annually. From Latin America to Africa and from Southeast Asia to the Middle East, Chinese goods, capital, and factories are driving economic growth. China is no longer just the world's factory. It is exporting its technological future: smartphones, solar panels, high-speed rail, and electric vehicles. If India begins to pivot toward this ecosystem, the consequences for Washington could be profound. Much of the developing world is already drifting toward China. If Asia's 2 largest nations find common ground, American influence in the region could erode far more rapidly than expected. That's why Wang Yi's arrival in New Delhi is so significant. It's not a routine diplomatic stop. It marks the first visit by a Chinese official of his rank in over 3 years, and the timing is crucial. India and China have long been rivals, with a history marred by conflict. The 1962 war, deadly skirmishes along the Himalayan border as recently as 2020, and a prolonged period of frosty relations. In response, New Delhi banned Chinese apps, slashed investments, and grew closer to the United States, especially during Modi's collaboration with Trump. But the situation is evolving. Direct flights between India and China are resuming after a long suspension. Beijing has pledged to address India's concerns over critical imports like fertilizer components and rare earth elements, which are vital to Indian agriculture and industry. The 2 nations are even discussing reopening border trade routes. Once seen as politically impossible, Wang Yi's visit carries a clear message: India and China can choose partnership over rivalry. For Washington, this is a troubling development. The rift between India and China has long been one of America's key strategic assets in Asia. It enabled the U.S. to court India as a bulwark against Beijing. If that divide narrows, America's regional leverage could collapse. Why is this happening now? The answer lies in America's own decisions. Trump's foreign policy was rooted in confrontation: tariffs, sanctions, restrictions, and blunt demands. Allies and adversaries alike were expected to fall in line. India complied for a time. Modi joined the Quad Alliance with the U.S., Japan, and Australia, an initiative explicitly aimed at countering China. Washington lauded India as its strongest regional partner. But mounting pressure soon strained the relationship. When Washington insisted India stop purchasing Russian oil, New Delhi refused. For India, energy security is non-negotiable. Russian oil was affordable and critical to curbing inflation for its vast population. Giving it up would have been economically disastrous. India's refusal exposed the limits of U.S. influence. Instead of seeking compromise, Washington reacted with criticism, veiled threats, and warnings of sanctions. The tone shifted from cooperation to coercion. For India, a proud nation intent on asserting itself as an independent global power, this was intolerable. China sensed the opportunity and moved swiftly. Wang Yi's visit came with calculated gestures of goodwill, reopening flight routes, addressing trade barriers, and discussing cross-border commerce. India responded, and in doing so, New Delhi sent a strong message: It will not be a pawn in Washington's Asia strategy. Ironically, Trump's aggressive policies may have had the opposite effect of what he intended. Instead of isolating China, they may have nudged India and China toward cautious engagement. The mistrust between them still lingers. The border dispute remains unresolved. But the shift is real, and Washington is watching with growing concern. Competition between India and China still runs deep, but the message is unmistakable. India intends to act on its own terms, not as a compliant partner to Washington. If India and China begin to cooperate, the global ripple effects could be immense. Take BRICS, for example. For years, its greatest internal weakness has been the rivalry between India and China. That friction prevented the bloc from emerging as a serious alternative to the Western-led G7. But if India and China even partially set aside their differences, BRICS could be transformed almost overnight. With Russia supplying energy, Brazil exporting food, South Africa providing minerals, and the two Asian giants finding alignment, BRICS could become a formidable challenge to U.S. global dominance. Even now, despite long-standing hostilities, India-China trade exceeds $135 billion annually. Imagine what could follow if more barriers fall. If border routes reopen, infrastructure projects advance, and long-term agreements on energy or technology are signed. Even modest steps could mark the beginning of a historic shift. That's why Wang Yi's visit matters. It's not just about easing border tensions. It's a test of whether India is ready to pursue a foreign policy more aligned with its own strategic interests and less tied to Washington's agenda. Trump's heavy-handed approach bears much of the blame. His over-reliance on tariffs, his dismissive attitude toward allies, and his one-size-fits-all demands have often backfired. Rather than isolating Beijing, his tactics encourage countries like India to explore alternative paths. Rather than weakening BRICS, Trump inadvertently helped create the conditions for its growth. The broader picture reveals something even more striking. While Washington focused on punishing rivals, Beijing quietly pivoted its economy toward the global south. Today, China exports more than $1.6 trillion worth of goods annually to developing nations, more than it sells to the United States and Europe combined. For decades, analysts insisted China depended on Western consumers, that without access to American and European markets, its economy would falter. But the opposite has proven true. The global south has become China's most vital customer base. How did this happen? Once again, Washington's own strategy played a role. Trump believed tariffs would cripple China's exports. Instead, Beijing built new markets. It expanded trade with Africa, invested aggressively in Latin America, and deepened ties with the Middle East. Through the Belt and Road Initiative, China constructed railways, highways, ports, and digital infrastructure across dozens of countries, integrating emerging economies directly into its supply chain. The result is a redrawn global trade map. Today, Beijing is a partner choice not in Washington or Brussels, but in Nairobi, Sao Paulo, Riyadh, and Jakarta. And this shift goes beyond exports. Chinese investment is now reshaping economies worldwide. For the first time in history, Chinese companies are investing more abroad than at home. In fact, last year China's overseas investment even surpassed that of the United States. From lithium mines in South America to solar farms in Africa, China is embedding itself deeply in strategic sectors. These aren't just commercial ventures. They are geopolitical footholds designed to secure long-term influence and resource access. U.S. tariffs can't stop this. In fact, the more Washington tried to isolate China, the more quickly this global pivot gained momentum. Tariffs were meant to contain China. Instead, they pushed it to expand outward, diversify its reach, and entrench itself across the developing world. One industry that captures this shift perfectly is electric vehicles, EVs. Over the past decade, China has built the largest EV sector in the world. Today, Chinese companies produce over 60% of all EVs sold globally. But now, they're going beyond domestic dominance, investing more money in EV ventures overseas and at home. New factories are springing up across Europe. Distribution networks are spreading throughout Southeast Asia. Africa and Latin America are opening to Chinese-made EVs that undercut Western brands in price and scale. But this is more than a race to sell cars. It's about embedding Chinese industry within foreign economies, creating jobs, infrastructure, and long-term economic dependency. Whoever controls EVs will lead global auto manufacturing for decades, and right now, that leader is China. Western carmakers face high costs and slower scalability. Chinese EVs are cheaper, fast to produce, and supported by massive state subsidies. But the advantage doesn't stop there. EVs rely on critical minerals like lithium, cobalt, and nickel, most of which are found in the global south. By expanding overseas, China isn't just exporting vehicles. It's securing control over the raw materials that power the future of transportation. Control the resources, control the industry, control the market. This creates a new kind of influence. When Brazil or Thailand hosts a Chinese EV plant, they're not just gaining an industry, they're anchoring their economic future to China's success. That type of alignment cannot be undone by tariffs or pressure from Washington. Take a step back, and the pattern becomes clear. Trump's tariffs didn't weaken China. They accelerated its ascent. They didn't solidify U.S. dominance. They opened space for Beijing to lead the global south into a new era. And now, with Wang standing in New Delhi, that realignment is coming into sharper focus. The era of America, setting the global rules, is fading. A new one is emerging, where China and its partners, potentially including India, begin building systems of their own. And the ultimate question remains, will the United States adapt to this new reality, or be left behind as others rewrite the rules of the global order? What just happened in New Delhi isn't the conclusion of the story. It's the opening chapter. And in the years to come, it may be remembered as the moment when the balance of power in Asia, and perhaps the world, began to shift. So stay tuned. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, and don't miss what comes next. Because the changes unfolding today could redefine the global economy and reshape the future in ways we've never seen before.